Welcome to Daily Debrief, where first today we discuss the blast in the Togliatti-Odessa ammonia pipeline, which runs from Russia to 3 Black Sea ports in Ukraine. Next, former US President Donald Trump is being indicted for mishandling classified information as president. As the case goes on, what will American politics look like? And last, the Lionel Messi deal everybody is talking about, the most lucrative deal in football ever. His move to Miami and the big money that conversations about football now invariably focus on. The Togliatti-Odessa pipeline exported 2.5 million tons of ammonia via a single Black Sea port in southern Ukraine until February 2022. That was until the Russia-Ukraine war began. Now Russia says the blast on the Ukrainian side on Monday night was sabotage and will make talks to renew the grain deal less easy. Interestingly, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky took a rather philosophical stand, calling the latest blast the consequence of war. We'll go over to Prabir Purkayastha, Editor-in-Chief of NewsClick, who joins us in the studio to unravel the crucial details. Prabir, thanks for joining us. Prabir, now the President of Ukraine has said that the pipeline burst, the ammonia pipeline burst, is a consequence of war, a rather philosophical statement, but Russia seems to think it's sabotage. Which of the two does it look like?
Well, both of it are true, because essentially when you say consequence of war, the consequence of war can also be sabotage.
Right.
Okay, so in that sense, Zelensky has, let's say, owned up to the sabotage of this pipeline. This pipeline was carrying ammonia, and it has not been functional since after the war started, what Russia calls the Special Military Operations, SMO.
Yes.
So it has really not been functional since then, because Ukraine refused to let Russia export ammonia through its port. Now, ammonia export, a large part of it used to take place to the Odessa port. So roughly, I think about 4.5 billion tons was what Russia used to export. And out of that, about 2 million or so was only from the Odessa port through the pipeline. So the pipeline has not been operative. So therefore, there was not such a large discharge of ammonia in the pipe. There was some ammonia in the pipe, but it's not such a large discharge. The main issue is that the negotiations which were on, that this pipeline should be used by Russia, should be allowed to be used by Russia for exporting ammonia to the rest of the world, because ammonia is a very important feedstock for fertilizers across the globe. And this fertilizer is something which is very critical for a number of countries for their agriculture, including, for example, India.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is why ammonia is an important constituent of such fertilizers. A number of countries import ammonia. Taking the pipeline out means that the one part of the fertilizer grain deal, which is what was achieved last year, if you remember, between Ukraine, Russia and the United Nations, also mediated by Turkey.
Right.
That deal had these two parts. One was Russia being able to export fertilizers. Other was Ukraine being allowed to export grains. Of course, Russia was also supposed to have been allowed to export grains, and a large part of it was supposed to go to Africa and other countries. Now, the interesting part of it, most of this production of grains, which Ukraine has exported, has not gone to Africa. In fact, Africa has a very small percentage of it. Most of it has gone actually to Europe.
Okay.
So this itself was not the basis on which this grain deal was struck. The other part of the grain deal was Russia would be allowed to export both fertilizers and grains. And the sanctions for both fertilizers and grains imposed by the European countries, the NATO alliance, European Union, would therefore be withdrawn. That part was never actuated. Grains, some part of it, yes, but fertilizers, no. So essentially, they do not have the ability to export either through the pipeline or through using European ports or European ships, because the insurance is the bottleneck for them. As you know, the European countries, the NATO or European Union sanctions, including United Kingdom, which is not a part of United European Union, they all have sanctions that they will not provide insurance for Russian ships. Russian ships can also not berth in European ports because of the sanctions. So all of this meant that while Ukraine could export, and as I said, primarily to European countries, actually Russia's part of either the grain deal or the fertilizer deal was not operational. And that's why Russia has been saying, unless you resolve these issues, we'll not let this deal continue, because this was supposed to be for a period of 12 months. So this has been the dispute. So there's one part of it, the pipeline. Blowing it up means one part of the deal is over. Pipeline was the way a large part of the ammonia could be exported from Russia. That ends, that possibility ends. And the other is, of course, other ways of actually exporting fertilizers itself. So Belarus is a much larger exporter of fertilizers, particularly phosphatic fertilizers. Russia uses more the nitrate-based fertilizers. So that part of the fertilizer deal seems to be also off the anvil. And as we know, Russia's complaint that sanctions on their ships have not been lifted, so they're not able to use European ports or European insurance, therefore making it difficult for other countries, for them to export to other countries. This is apart from the financial sanctions, which are also an impediment for food exports. But maybe for that they had a little more leeway, because the banks were instructed for food grain exports or imports, exports to African countries and import from Russia. The bank should allow that to happen. So, but the issue of insurance and being able to access ports, these two are still bottlenecks.
Right, Prabir. So essentially what you're saying is that the idea that the poorer countries would get access to grains as part of the deal on fertilizer actually never worked out.
Neither grains nor fertilizer.
Nor fertilizer. And now the European Union has in a sense shot itself in the foot again by blowing up this pipeline, because they were the main beneficiaries of any grain export that was happening from the Black Sea ports in Ukraine.
Yes, there is. They would have to work out alternate ways of accessing Ukrainian grain for their markets, but the easy route, the Baltic Sea route, is there, but again there are problems. But the Black Sea route seems to be certainly a problem for them now. If this particular deal expires, which it is now going to expire shortly. So yes, I think that is true. And the hypocrisy of the West, and in this case the United Nations apparatus, the Secretary General and his close colleagues, I think they are also complicit in the fact that they were the ones who were instrumental in really having this deal. But then till date, the fertilizer deal has not been made public. We don't know what has been struck. We know broadly what is there, but somehow United Nations apparatus has published the food deal, the food grains deal, but not the fertilizer deal. And it does seem that there is a lack of good faith on the negotiations by the European powers, as well as some degree of complicity of the United Nations apparatus itself in not putting public pressure that there is something that you have to fulfill, because this is a part of a composite deal. So I think that part is very much also there. But you are right that if the European unions were the major beneficiaries of the Ukraine grain trade, why is it that they are themselves now not really interested in the grains trade either? Well, certain countries have a problem that there is already a production that they have themselves got. The markets might collapse if the Ukraine grain enters the market. So there is already some tension between some of the European Union countries and Ukraine on that one. All that is supposed to be under the carpet because on the face of it, they're all on the same side, bash Russia, support Ukraine, take whatever it takes to support Ukraine, but they're also protecting their own markets. So I don't know, maybe a certain number of European countries do not really want even this grain deal to continue. It may affect their own exports to other deficit countries like France, Germany, and so on. So we have to see what the dynamics within European Union is. But there is no question, the bulk of the Ukrainian grain in the name of supplying to Africa was really going to European Union. I think Statistica has a chart which actually shows what is there. And you can see, and it's quite interesting to see that the bulk of the trade is to go countries which are not Africa and not poor.
Maybe those are the real consequences of war, Prabir. Thanks very much for joining us. All eyes are on South Florida in the United States, where former US President Donald Trump owns a sprawling resort known as Mar-a-Lago. That is where classified documents were found by federal prosecutors last year. The prosecution has now concluded that Trump was president when the documents reached that destination. The case against Trump, a frontrunner in the next presidential election, will now shift to Mar-a-Lago and Florida. Anish from People's Dispatch joins us now over video conference with why this is important and the other updates in the cases against Trump. Anish, thanks for joining us. Anish, should we begin with just an update as to what's happened this far in this talk about indictment of the former president of the United States?
Yeah, so the indictment itself is quite an extensive one. It is probably one of the most extensive to be put up against any former president in the U.S. And it's also the first time, obviously, that a former U.S. president is also being indicted in under federal charges, federal criminal charges. Let's be very clear about that. And so it is quite an astounding document, actually, if you look through it, because it's apart from about 37 charges that we are looking at, some 3 dozen charges that we are looking at. It also gives you an insight into the person that Trump is, basically, because when you look at the manner in which he has acted since he has left the presidency, which apart from taking away several classified documents. We're not talking about a couple dozens. We're talking about hundreds of classified documents, many of which are yet to be returned to the departments that he had taken it away from. And he is actually somebody who likes to boast about a lot of his time in the presidency, about how he had access to it, his callousness with which he has dealt with some of these documents, where he even showed it to certain journalists to actually just depict how significant he was as a president. And the very fact that he had lied multiple times about the number of documents that he had, the attempt to even destroy some of these documents just so that he can, wash it away from himself, and the manner in which he has routinely misled the prosecution, the grand jury, and even the FBI to the end of not giving back several of these documents. I mean, if he had cooperated, this case wouldn't have gone this far, obviously. But the fact that he not only refused to cooperate but willingly tried to damage not just these documents but also evidence as a whole. So this shows that Trump is somebody who is just prone to going to whatever ends that is needed to actually get out of a situation. But in very many cases, he's not very smart to actually do it in a manner that he can actually get away from the situation. On another side, we need to also talk about the fact that these charges cumulatively carry about 190 years of maximum prison sentence. So this is, as I said, one of the most astounding indictments against a former president for what he did and during and after the presidency. And but even if he gets convicted in all of the charges, or even one of the charges, and gets a jail sentence, he still can run for presidency and become the president. There's nothing stopping him from that.
Right, Anish. Now, the moment you talk about the presidency, I'm immediately going to think about, the fact that the Capitol Hill, the run on the Capitol Hill is just not talked about at all. The media seems to have forgotten it in the United States. And even the federal investigators are not talking about it. Instead, now the focus is shifting from Washington, D.C. to Miami, to Florida. It seems it's hard to see whether he's going to be indicted, or is he actually being let off on something which sounds far more serious in some senses.
Yeah, like the one of the most interesting facts about like the multiple investigations and indictments that now he's facing, the Capitol Hill storming is definitely one of the most serious ones when it comes to in terms of crime. So one of the only things that can actually lead to somebody being barred from running for presidency or even becoming the president is not even that the fact that they are in jail for a criminal conviction, but the fact that they try to overthrow the state, and which is something very serious, and which is something that came out of the Civil War era legislation at the time.
Right.
And so definitely that is the only thing that can stop him from doing it. But the fact that like the manner of evidence that is being collected, and the manner in which the Capitol Hill storming investigation has gone through, Trump somehow managed to like seemingly get out of it so far. Like the kind of investigation that is done against him is not that serious. Even the charges, like there is a great deal of question about how significant these charges will be if it reaches the Supreme Court, especially like when you're talking about overthrowing the state. Is something that would require a greater degree of evidence. But in this case, we do not know if the FBI, if the federal prosecutors have that level of evidence, or if they are investigating in a serious manner. But definitely, the case currently that we have, what you're seeing is the response that should ideally, in an ideal society, where it's supposed to be the fact that a president tried to use classified documents to just boast about, and the manner in which the carelessness with which he actually dealt with national security, for a person who talks about national security quite a lot, and for a person who has actually
Right.
initiated an indictment against Assange for supposedly conspiring to leak documents with Chelsea Manning,
Right.
is the very person who's now caught red-handed with, callously handling hundreds of classified documents of various kinds, ranging from U.S. nuclear program to its defense program, to even like counterattack plans that the U.S. Defense Department has. All of that is being mishandled, and even at this point, even if there is a conviction, we are talking about this person becoming very likely to become the president, or having a great degree of chances to become the president. We do not see the kind of reaction that we should be seeing, which is a complete, condemnation, not just from Democrats, but also from the Republicans. But even the people running against him in the Republican primaries are either supporting him or completely silent about it. So this is the kind of situation that we are seeing, where the case is becoming quite extensively politicized, and is creating very polarized reactions from the general public, from Republican supporters, like partisan supporters, not just Republicans, but also Democrats. And it is becoming this sort of like political charade that is really not going to have a significant impact on the elections in that we are going to see next year.
All right, Anish, thanks a lot for joining us with that update. Reactions are pouring into Lionel Messi's announcement days ago to move to Inter Miami, where he's getting a $9 million apartment. But that's just the tip of the fantastic deal he's getting. He picked Miami over Saudi Arabia and options in Europe. It's inevitable that the fact that he's becoming a part of the institution until even after he retires is drawing the most attention. Sports journalist Siddhant Ane joins us over video conference with more details. Siddhant, thanks for joining us. Siddhant, we spoke about Messi yesterday, and I guess we can't help it, but the same plot, we have to stick to the same plot because it's all about the money, isn't it?
Oh yeah, pretty much. And I guess about how much money, I think, inevitably became the question. And if you look at the news or conversations that are happening around this transfer, a lot of it focuses on Messi's net worth, the kind of impact this move will have on it, the fact that apparently he's going to be stationed in a $9 million apartment by the beach in Miami, which has a lift for cars and things like that. So essentially, the entire story is one of the financial implications of the move, not just for Messi himself, who's of course towards the end of the career, although news coming in, or at least indications coming in, say that he might win the Player of the Year, the Men's Player of the Year, again for 2023. So by no means sort of waning in that sense in terms of the impact he has on the pitch. But maybe looking to set himself up for the next few years. We talked before on the show about how he could possibly be, of course, moving to Saudi Arabia, joining Ronaldo and the other sort of big names that are being linked with that league. Instead, choosing to go to the MLS, and a lot of people have bought in. Perhaps Messi himself has been watching. There's a new Michael Jordan film out which talks about his entry into the National Basketball Association, and how well they kind of handled the negotiations with Nike at the time. So taking a leaf out of that book, the deal involving Messi will also involve Apple and other sponsors of the MLS, which will kind of add a revenue share in a sense of the entire league's performance to Messi's personal kitty, which itself is going to be somewhere in the range of about $150 million anyway. So again, Pragya, every time we talk about football, the numbers, given that these are individual players we're talking about, the numbers are quite, mind-boggling, massive numbers that we're talking about always. So in this case, we don't really know what the final number will be. The hope is, I think, for the league as it seeks to grow, that having these marquee players, they're called, I think, designated players or something like that. Each team in the MLS is allowed to have 3 of them. Messi will, of course, become one of them at Miami, bumping off one of the existing players who are above the. Otherwise, they have a salary cap to ensure that the league remains kind of a level playing field and competitive. But 3 of these players are allowed beyond that, and this clearly probably is more than the entire wage total of the whole league put together. So in that sense, it's not just above the salary cap; it's hit the cap out of the park. Yeah. So go on.
Is Miami going to be a better place to retire in than heading off to any other part of the world? Because although, like you just said, he's going to keep playing, be Player of the Year, but it's inevitable to talk about when he stops.
Yeah. So in that sense, whether of course, the social media hasn't taken kindly to the kind of remarks that came in when Messi announced his decision. Some comments were made about him choosing to move to a league that has lesser demands, which is true in many ways. It's not going to be as competitive as La Liga, or in that sense as intense as La Liga or the English league or even the French league for that matter. Which doesn't mean that physically, as he heads towards 40, the demands on him will become less, because he will have that much more of a role, I think, to play in ensuring that his club is actually successful on the pitch as well. So winning trophies and all of that, he'll have a critical role to play in that process. When he quits, I think he's looking at it from a long-term investment perspective, perhaps looking at America as a destination where he can, with his family, build a long-term future rather than Saudi. So maybe the choice had something to do with that, not just the money factor. How good Miami is as a place to settle is a question mark. Pragya, if you talk to perhaps the Republican governor in Florida, he'll deny climate change altogether. But the fact is that a large part of that state is facing the brunt of rising sea levels because of human-induced climate change. So I don't know how long-term Messi and his team are looking at things. But in the short term, definitely it seems like not a bad option for. I had had perhaps somewhat I don't know, questionably called Messi the last white hope at the 2022 FIFA World Cup. So in that sense, very much sticking with the theme of things or scheme of things, it's a good place for reasonably well-off white people to play golf and retire in. So if that's the aim, then Messi's on the right track.
Right, Siddhant. Thanks a lot for joining us. And that's all we have for today. Thanks very much for watching Daily Debrief. We'll see you again on Monday. Until then, you can find more of our work on our website, peoplesdispatch.org, our social media accounts on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube have more updates and this show, Daily Debrief. Thanks again for watching.